Hi, welcome to Hamilton and Hazen, Behind the Mic. Join author M.L. Hamilton and me, I'm narrator Kelley Hazen, as we discuss our latest audiobook. Born from our 7 years of collaboration and more than 60 audiobooks we've produced together, listen to the ins, the outs, the ups, and the downs, the inside track you love to follow, Behind the Mic.
Welcome to our third session of Behind the Mic. Today we're going to be talking about the urban fantasy series, the Moonlight Trilogy, and in particular the Moon Thief, which has just gone into production through ACX. So thank you for being here again, Kelley. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
So you had some questions for me this time, and so I'll kind of turn it over to you and let you guide our talk for today.
Yay. Yeah, I get to put you on the hot seat. No. No, this is funny. The last one with Bruce, I know the last Behind the Mic we did was my husband and producer and soundscape writer, music composer was with us, and he wanted to get his questions beforehand. He wanted to know what he was going to ask. You have no idea what I'm going to ask you.
I do not.
Well, I think just in honor of the fact that we're starting yet another new series together. And what does this make? Is this our 7th series? There's Peyton, Zion, Avery, Year of Discovery,
Samar,
and now
so
Moon
sixth.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I think just in light of the fact that we are starting a new series, I think the most obvious question is, where did the idea for this particular series come from? And specifically, but also in general, I mean, in the years that we've been working together now, I mean, we do our plan, right? We have our retreat and we do our year's projection of what we're going to record. And I can't think of a time then when that projection didn't get interrupted because you had an idea. The last one was the Year of Discovery. Let's produce a book every month around this theme. And so that was sort of a structural. And I remember there was another one. I mean, you've got some ideas about where Peyton may or may not go, right? And then I remember a brief conversation we had a while back about, there was something about the suffragettes that intrigued you.
Yeah.
So specifically, where did the idea for the Moonlight Trilogy come from? And in general, where do your ideas, how does an idea grab a hold of you, and how do you know I've got enough gas on this that I want to turn it into a series?
So this one is kind of interesting. At the time, Amazon was doing a thing where you could enter your book in and they would consider it for publication. And I wanted to try it. It was Kindle Scout. It was the Kindle Scout program. And I wanted to try, and I wanted to see if I could get through the program and what kind of interest I would get. And so I knew I needed a new series. I needed it. It's hard to kind of track in when you're in the middle of a series. You can't track into something unique like that, a different program or something. So it needs to be a new series. So I came up with this idea for these three, that for a trilogy. And I wanted to set it in San Francisco because that's what I'm most comfortable with. But I wanted to kind of play around. Urban fantasy is huge. It's a huge genre. I love writing it. I love doing the Avery Nolan series. Everybody asks me, I get emails all the time asking me, when is the next Avery Nolan going to come out? And I keep telling people that series is done. There's no more Avery. And so I figured there was a deficit or an opening here where people might really enjoy writing the Moon Thief. And I think reading the Moon Thief. I think I've told you before, writing the murder mysteries, I love writing them, but they're very heavy and they take an emotional toll. I mean, when you're talking about murder and you're talking about people losing their lives, it's hard. And so I like to kind of have a palate cleanser in between those that is more fun for me to write. It's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit more I don't, not interesting. It's not more interesting. That's not what I mean, but it's just a little bit less intense. And so I came up with this idea. My son is a microbiologist, and we talk a lot about stem cells, and the idea of stem cells changing. I mean, we know we're on the cusp of them changing people's health and changing genetic disorders and stuff like that. And I thought, well, what if somebody used stem cells to sort of super enhance somebody's abilities? And that's where it kind of came out of, was this whole talk with my son about science and biology, and then wanting to do an urban fantasy. And it just, the idea came to me of this, to combine the two of them. When I first wrote it, I spent a lot of time talking with my son about different stem cell, how stem cells work. What is that? We did some research on it. I don't know how close it is, but I wanted it to be where it wasn't such a stretch of the imagination for the things that happen in the Moon Thief to have happened, I guess.
Cool. No, that's totally cool. And I think it's good for the listeners to know. I mean, you use the idea, and of course I haven't read the next two books yet, but at least in the first one, your focus is not on the science per se. It's not like a Michael Crichton novel, you know what I mean?
Right.
But your focus is on the fantasy and the fantasy of the science, and the interaction of how the people are dealing with the science and the fantasy, as opposed to like what's actually going on in the physique. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. You actually just gave me my next question. Clearly you're in love with San Francisco, and is San Francisco, again, specifically, in California in general, all your work is basically anchored. Why? How did that?
Yeah. So, when you first start writing, they always tell you, write what you know. And I grew up just outside of San Francisco, 8 miles, right in Pacifica, right? Literally like next door to San Francisco. And so San Francisco loomed large in my whole makeup of who I am, my whole philosophy of life. I mean, San Francisco is a unique city in the sense of its diversity, and it's very small city, but with big impact. And so San Francisco has always been, I always get kind of teary eyed whenever we cross the bridge coming into San Francisco, because it's like coming home. So San Francisco has always been big to me, and California is vitally important. My son was just, he was looking for another job, and he was thinking of going to Boston. And that was such the whole process of thinking through that, of moving from California and leaving California. And the people in Boston kept telling him, are you sure you understand the weather when you come out here? Are you sure you want to leave the California weather? And it's not just about the weather. It's just everything with California. It's home. It's what I know. And I feel most comfortable writing about San Francisco. I feel most comfortable writing about California. I think we have a unique state in the sense that you can go in one day from the coast to the mountains, and in between. So it's something that I think should be almost a character in the books.
I think it is. I mean, Jake loved Potrero Hill in the morning. Those are the first words of yours I ever narrated. And I think it is. It's certainly in Peyton, San Francisco is as big a character as any of the others. But and San Francisco is such a beautiful city. It does remind, it's what you say. It's a small city in like New York in that regard. New York City, a small city with an incredibly heavy, big hammer. I mean, but
Yeah.
Such a beautiful city. You can't say that about, New York is a beautiful city at night. When it's dark, and there are other towns. Chicago is beautiful, the downtown, and there's a lot. But San Francisco, it is magical. And I got my first case of bronchitis in San Francisco. I That's my best memory. No, but yeah, it's really special. Um, One of the things that always intrigues me about your work is that you know, I mean, I work a lot with listeners, because in order to promote the books, and I have the storyteller review team to to they're not beta listeners, but they just to get reviews up and get the buzz going about the audiobooks that I narrate. And one of the things I discover with my listeners is they're like, oh no, I only listen to mysteries, or oh no, I only listen to romance. And I know a lot of authors are that same way. This is the only thing I write. You write everything. I mean, you just across the boards. Explain yourself. How, and I mean, and from my point of view and I'm a reader. I mean, I'm a huge reader, and it is, most authors brand themselves, in a genre, and I will say that there's always intrigue in everything you write. But how do you, again, explain yourself? I mean, how does this happen to you? How is it that you can be effective in all these genres? I mean, just explain yourself.
um, so I originally started as a fantasy writer, and I've always loved fantasy. I love fantasy in movies. I love fantasy in reading. Every type of fantasy. My first, experience with it was The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and those sort of set the tone for the future. But as a teacher and as a reader myself, I don't limit myself just to that. So I can pick up almost anything in any genre and really enjoy it and find great meaning in it. As a writer, you're right. There tends to be, I tend to always have an element of mystery in everything I write. There always is some kind of something to be solved. So I think I gravitate more towards the mystery genre just in anything that I write. But I think that for me, it's just, I don't like being pigeonholed. And I think it's like an actor. The only way I could describe it is like an actor who doesn't want to be typecast. I don't want to be typecast as just a mystery author, as just a fantasy author. If you tell me, could you write this? I'm going to try it. I'm not going to say I necessarily will do it well. I had an experience where a writer friend and I decided to write a romance, and Raven Song was the romance that I tried to write. And it clearly is not really a romance. It's more of a mystery. So I don't think that I'm necessarily proficient at everything, but I'm going to certainly give it a shot, because I don't like to be typecast. I don't like to be told that this is what you are and this is what you have to be. I think being a chameleon would be probably the best way, is to be able to explore all those different, each genre lends itself to a different type of skill set or a different type of writing. And I love to explore that. I love changing up. I would hope that nobody would say of my stuff that it's stale or it's formulaic. I just really, that would be the worst to me, is for somebody to say her writing has become so formulaic. I think if you switch it up and you try something that maybe you're not comfortable with, it allows you to stay fresher. That's a terrible word, but it allows you to maybe not fall into that rut of just churning out something because you need to, hit the word count or something.
Or develop a block.
Yeah.
You're not, I mean, if you're not going to develop a block, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And again, something you said, I'm not sure if it exactly sparks my next question specifically, but that does intrigue, because when you listen to writers, something you said intrigues me, just like your writing. A lot of authors will say, oh, this character spoke to me, or it's very much, if they write something, it's because they've been driven by a character, or they've been driven by a plot line. And I do detect, in talking with you about your work when we get ready to record the things that you've done, is that you are very much aware, and you do seem to be intrigued by this idea of not a set of rules exactly, but giving yourself a structure, like an imposed structure, and then seeing how you work within that structure. Can I
Yeah.
work within the structure? Can I travel this maze and find my way out of it? And I really respect that. I think it's as you know, it's not just driven by what you want to write, but by challenging yourself. I sense that you like to challenge yourself and as a writer, and I think that's it's funny you bring up Raven Song. um uh for our listeners, you actually recorded Raven Song was out as an audiobook before you and I started working together, and it is unusual, uh although, well, it is unusual for an author to decide, particularly if they write in different genres, to only work with one audiobook narrator. And normally, they'll use a different narrator for every series or every, or sometimes every book. What made you decide that you wanted to work only with me? That you wanted to brand your audiobooks with my voice in my studio?
I I think well, first of all, you approach it with the utmost respect for what I want to do, and you seem to understand in a way that I haven't found with a lot of people what I'm trying to achieve. It's funny because I'll write a scene, and then as I'm editing the scene, I'll think, oh, how is this going to play in audio? I do that now. And I always know though that I can kind of trust you. And I've told you this before. There are many times where I've been worried about a scene, and you've hit it, you've nailed it exactly the way I wanted with the emotions. And you did that a couple times with the Moon Thief. Times where there was, we've talked about the emoting, and the negative emotions can be difficult, but also the humor is to me a challenge, and it's timing, and it's that kind of thing. And you get me, you get the cadence of my, I guess that's what it is, you get the cadence of my words. We talked with Bruce about um, how is writing similar to music. And I think that in the way that writing is similar to music is that there's a cadence to the words, there's a flow to the sentences, and you seem to have the same matching flow. We seem to just gel that way. And you don't ever, I never find myself going, that's not the way I would have read that. You seem to always hit it. And so once I heard yours and I could compare it against the one that was done before, there's a richness to your delivery. And I think it's your experience as an actor. Um, you bring this embodiment of the characters to it, that a lot of audiobooks, when I listen to them, it's just the person reading the book, and that's has its place, and that's a beautiful thing. But it's so much better to hear. There are times I can hear a smile in your voice. There are times where I can hear a laugh in your tone, where you're not actually laughing, but I can hear that laughter in your tone. So you embody that character, you become that character. You can bring your voice down at certain points when it requires that, or you can punch it up where others. I think about the scream, the primordial scream. It still gives me shivers whenever I hear it, of Peyton's at the end of Frankenstein. There's this primordial scream, and it just, as I'm telling you this, as I'm talking about it, I can feel that shiver of come over me, of that scream just striking. And I thought you just nailed it. So I think it's just that ability of yours, where we don't necessarily do a whole bunch of talking before we record a book. We don't do a whole bunch of dialogue about it, and I don't point things out to you. I kind of give it to you and let it go, and you never disappoint. So we just have this like, you seem to know who if the characters are fully formed in my head, they're fully formed in yours as well.
I
And
have to say, yeah, I have to say that, and this rarely, it rarely occurs, and maybe it occurs often for different narrators with different authors, right? Maybe it happens a lot, but in my experience. So I'm not trying to make a universal statement here, but you have said to me that you use your audiobooks, listening back to your work to allow it to make you a better writer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have said the longer that we've worked together, and we have over 60 audiobooks now, right?
Yeah.
And how many have we sold? 20,000? Over 20,000?
Over 20,000. We were almost at 21 just in the last month.
Yeah. You have said that, how will this sound in audio? But not only how will this sound in audio, but that you and I collaborate. And it's actually the last question you asked in Behind the Mic when Bruce was with us, Behind the Mic too. Where is this going? And when we are hitting on all cylinders, it's a new art form.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you were the one that first said that. You were the, that it's a different. It's more than writing, and it's certainly not a podcast. And it's not your average bear in terms of audiobooks. It's something more. It's something elevated. Can you speak to that at all, or I know you agree with me because you said it.
Yeah. So when I first, the only way I can do it is kind of in reverse. When I first, it was Potrero Hill, when you did Potrero Hill, I told you this. I've been very clear about that. I didn't want to hear it. I was really reluctant to hear it. And I let it sit for a couple of weeks without even listening to it. And I started listening to it, and it hit me that just as when a book is read by somebody, the book no longer belongs to the author. And that was the problem I had with writing. And for so long, I wouldn't let anybody read my writing because I felt like I was giving away a child to somebody, and it would no longer be mine. I was sending it out into the world, and it would no longer be mine. And whatever it was, warts and all, was no longer mine. Which it is. It's absolutely true with writing. Once you give it away to a reader, it becomes their experience, and it becomes their relationship with those characters. With the audiobook, what was really intimidating to me about it was to hear my own words back at me. And I feared that they wouldn't hold up to that expression. And then it hit me probably through the first chapter of Potrero Hill that this isn't a book, and it's not a recording. It's an experience, and it's a whole separate thing. It's not mine. It's not yours. It's ours. It's our creation. And what we each bring to it is a part of that puzzle piece that fits together to make this incredible experience for people. And while I take great pride in what we do, and I take great pride in what we've accomplished, the real, where the rubber meets the road, is in the responses we get from our listeners. And the number of people, every time you tell me that you send out the thing for the review team, and they request my books over other books, that to me is where, that's the proof in the pudding. That shows that we have created this thing that is beyond you and I. It's outside of us, and it's its whole separate entity from the book and the separate recording. It's something new.
I think it's thrilling that there's so many of your the fans that have been with you as an author before you went into audio, and now they're asking you, your reading fans are asking you, when is the audio going to come out, so that they can read it and then listen to it, clearly delineating that those are two completely different experiences, and they're able to enjoy both of them. I don't know if you know this, that you mentioned Peyton's primordial scream at the end of Frankenstein. I record by myself. Bruce doesn't engineer my recording sessions. I record alone, and then he'll mix it and do any editing that needs to be done. And I'll always mention to him if there's something special within the chapter, a speakerphone or something that an explosion, something he needs to work on. And I told him, I said, the end of this is pretty big, so listen to it. And he actually came back to me and he said, that's not good enough. You've got to come back. He goes, we have to go back into the studio. He goes, I think you can take it farther than that. Because, in this intimate of a situation, volume is tricky.
Yeah.
And anything that needs to be shouted, anything that needs to be, violent, anything that's loud is very hard to do without distorting. And that scream, to be able, to be authentic was to distort. And so, and to pull it back too far, then it's not authentic, right? And so it was finding that space, and that really required an engineer in that moment, and for Bruce to put his ears on it for us to get that right. And I do think more than anything in any audiobook I've ever recorded, the number of people who have come back to me with the response of how powerful and chilling that moment was, it's and so that's one of those situations where I'm just glad that we bring a full recording studio and an engineer and a producer to the books that we do, because you can't get that with a USB mic in a closet,
No, but I think even more than that, to kind of, and if our viewers haven't heard that audiobook, they need to get it. That scream, and I've heard from fans myself about that scream. You have to know Peyton, you have to know Marco, and you have to know that moment for her is the most just gut wrenching moment of her entire existence. And in order for that to give the chill that it does, people have to have been part of this journey and known who they are and how they've come along and what that scream really meant. I mean, that was the scream of a woman who believes there's nothing anymore. And I've heard from people that just it brought them instantly to tears, which is just incredible. If you think about that, about that ability. The first time I knew I wanted to be a writer was I read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And he manipulates the reader so well, where you find yourself aligning with and being in support of a murderer, a vile, villainous murderer. And you find yourself feeling for him. And to me, that is the power of the written word, is being able to evoke that emotion. And that's the same thing with what we're talking about, is that moment in that audiobook when you hit that scream. There's not a person that could hear that wouldn't have that visceral gut level reaction to that, and that feeling, that emotion, and being able to call forth that in people. That's some powerful stuff. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
I agree.
And it's what I had envisioned when I wrote those words. It's just one word. It's one word. And when I wrote it, and the end, and that was the end, I knew it had that impact. I didn't realize the impact it would have when it's spoken, when it's said.
It's everything. It's everything in one word, in that one event. And and I mean, and I've said this to you before, and I'll say it again. I couldn't have found it if you hadn't written it. In all those books over all that time, if you hadn't have built that into that relationship and into that person, it could not have been there. So congratulations to you. Excuse me. Well, I think that I'm out of questions. I mean, think of a better place to stop this particular episode.
Well, I do have a question for you then. So how, because you've voiced so many characters for me, how is the characters in the Moon Thief different, and how did you approach that? How is it different than anything else that you've approached?
You know, it's so interesting because it harkens back to something else you said too. There, early in my narrating career, it would always be like, oh, okay, well, that voice was low, and he had this accent, and he lisped on his S's, so this person has to be, you know. And it was very much almost like the way that Bruce describes it. Is I would think of the palette, and I would think I've got 3 characters down here, and I've got 4 characters up here, and so I need to get, you know, and then the more I narrated, and the more I just allowed myself to embody those people, to trust who I imagined those people to be, and had enough confidence in the narrators, or excuse me, in the authors I was working with, you know, that they gave me enough information that these people were specific. Right. And then it just becomes a matter of becoming those people. And from the beginning of the Moon Thief, with the discussion of San Quentin and that dry, you know, it's serial killers, rapists,
and musicians.
Right. You know, yeah, and it's you know, it doesn't take much to understand exactly who this woman is.
Yeah.
And you know, and Brianna Perry, and yeah. Sister, you know, the discussion with her sister Clara, right? And just her sister going over the top, over and over and over, and you know, the DA that she's passionately in love with, and just I think you described him as vanilla, but he's so, you know, wide-eyed.
Yeah.
You know, and this actually goes back to Behind the Mic 1. You had said, how do you know, do you put on a hat, or how do you be these people? But I used to sit in a big cozy chair, and if you get my newsletter, you saw the booth when it was Bruce's old timeout chair, and that's what I would sit in when I narrated. And then I started to have back trouble because I was sitting too much, and so I took my office and I took the recording booth, and now they're standing. You know, I stand to record, and since I've been standing, I've actually found myself taking physicality, and it'll start out, you know, just narrating a character, and I've noticed this as I narrate the books, the characters get stronger. Maybe that's bad, you know. I mean, maybe I should, you know, prepare them, and they should be great from the beginning. But they get stronger usually through the first couple of books. And it's funny because if you watch a new series on television,
absolutely,
it often takes a couple of episodes for it to gel, right? You know, and you go, I don't know, I like it, I'll watch the next one, and then, you know, it'll hit its stride. But they'll start out, and then all of a sudden I'll realize that, you know, I'm like this when I'm narrating that one, or it'll be like, you know, or there'll be just some little thing that some little physicality that'll start to accompany the voice, and that's, you know, that's been happening lately. But
I just have to piggyback off that, because I love what you just said there, because I my sons have remarked on this before. I write in my own office, and because I will catch myself mouthing the words as I'm writing, I'm like saying the dialogue. I'm actually in that, and I think that idea of you actually physically acting out the characters so matches what I do when I'm writing, and I'm not even aware of it. I've had my son say, why are you doing that with your mouth? And I'll just be writing away, and I'm talking, you know, and I think, as schizophrenic as that may sound, it's all part of being in there and living it, and getting right into the meat of it.
It's also that for me, it's also just memory wise. I think it helps incredibly to, just remembering who that person is,
Yeah.
because you see them and muscle memory is, I mean, it's so powerful. And to have that muscular response to the character, as well as just, remembering who they are, what they sound like, and that it's one of the most powerful characters you've ever written. And I think I've told you this, but it's and now his name completely goes out of my head. But it's from World of Samar. It's
Taller.
Talar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's my alter ego. I don't know if he's me, if I was him in another life, whoever this character is that I've given voice to, that you've written. But he's a second nature to me now, and I'll actually be walking through the world and something will happen and I'll actually respond to the situation as Talar. And it's
It's
almost,
it's funny you pick him. I think of, I used to tell people Peyton always was talking in my head. And so I always think of Peyton as my alter ego. But Talar for me, he is like, I think the most three-dimensional character I probably have ever written. And when you pick him, it's interesting because I see him as that was when I think I finally turned a corner in my own writing, is creating that character. And um he's such a flawed human being, but he's such a beautiful human being. And the idea of that there are these people, and I truly believe this in my heart of hearts, that there are people in this world that are too beautiful for this world, that this world is just too harsh for, and they can't function in this world because it's not the world for them. And he to me embodies that ideal of wanting to be so much more and being demanded on to be so much more by everyone around him, and yet running from that as fast as he can because he knows it's going to destroy him. He knows it's going to tear him apart. And it's funny that when you read him, because he's so special to me, and I think I told you that he's such a special character to me because I feel like he is this butterfly, this butterfly that is just too fragile for the world that we live in. And even a fantasy world, there's just certain people that have this inner beauty and this inner light. And I think when you get in further into the books, I think it's Shandar who says at some point that there is people that the world that are too light, that have too much light within them to be able to, they burn too fast.
yeah, it's funny. The part of it that responds to my alter ego is how threatening he can be.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, he
that
can be
part.
scary. He can be scary. And the point is that he always operates on this verge of being out of control.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
always, and he so fears it. And the more he fears it, the more out of control he becomes.
When I know that, and I think it's kind of interesting that, so you wrote Moon Thief a year ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And it wasn't on our agenda to record, when we did our production schedule. We really put it off in the future. And then you came back and, because you were going to, I think we wanted to get all of the books out, or you wanted to write all of the books, and then we were going to do the audio or something.
Yeah.
But then life happened, right? And you didn't get to, the title for #2 is Moonwalker.
Yes.
Is that correct? And
Yes.
you didn't get to the Moonwalker when you thought you would. And the excitement over the Moon Thief print had dwindled somewhat. So when you and I discussed it, we thought, let's do the audio and sort of reinvigorate the conversation. And then Moonwalker would come out shortly after that. When can we hope to see the Moonwalker?
I'm hoping by this month. I'm halfway through the writing stage, and that's got to go to the editors. But I'm hoping by the end of this month that we'll have the Moonwalker in hand and we can get going on.
Which we should be getting
Yeah, we could get going on it. I'm really excited for it. I think Brianna's character has developed a lot in the Moonwalker, and her trajectory is a little bit more. I wrote the first one more of a comedy. Her trajectory in this one, it's a little bit more tragic. I think she's really coming to realize what is in front of her and how this has changed everything for her. And if you think about it, you brought it up, I think you kind of sparked the idea for me. Is you said, I said I wanted it to be light and kind of fun, and you said, well, it's kind of horrifying what she's going through. And I thought that, that whole idea of being forced to leave behind what you knew and what you thought and what you wanted your life to be, and realizing you just can't have it anymore, that's a pretty heavy thing to come to grips with.
She's much more cerebral than your other heroines so far. Not entirely. I mean, I'm sure we could dissect the Year of Discovery and find those, but in terms of your series, your single series heroines, or single heroine series, she's more. I find her to be more of a thinker and more cerebral and more confident than just questioning herself is not necessarily an issue with her, like it is sometimes with some of your other women. And I like that. I mean, I think that's interesting. I think that's it's fresh, as to use the word you used. Also, I do have a question. Moon Thief, huge action sequence.
Yeah.
Peyton Brooks, Mysteries, FBI, constant action sequences, very specific action sequences in Avery Nolan, sporadic action sequences in Zion Sawyer. How those are very difficult to narrate and sustain it, right? So that it's not, to give it shape. I mean, it's definitely higher, right, in terms of intensity, but it can't just be up here the whole time. How do you write those? I mean, how you have so many action sequences and action scenes in so many of your books. How do you write those?
So my son's fiance mentioned the other day, we were talking about watching the Marvel movies, and because of WandaVision came out, and I haven't seen all the Marvel movies, so I've been given homework by my children and their partners to go through the whole series in order. And so I'm working my way through them. And she was saying that she doesn't particularly like the action sequences in those movies. What she really likes is the character development and who the characters are and their relationships with each other. And I was thinking about action sequences, and I thought, I do like action sequences. I'm not a big fan of car chases, but I do think action sequences can be really exciting to write. And you've got to ramp. I mean, I think of the physicality you were talking about earlier, and I think when I'm writing an action sequence, I know my shoulders are up higher, and that I'm in that zone, and I'm seeing it happening as I'm going through, and I'm trying to imagine where are all the players and how is this going to play out, and does it. And the thing that I think is hardest about an action sequence is I don't want it to become a superhero movie. I want it to be a real situation. I was thinking of the scene in Goblins where they're there and they're going to find Zonov, and they believe he's in the building, and then the phone starts ringing down the street, and they start running towards it. And I was trying to think of where's everybody, where's their placement, who gets there first, how does somebody, what's going to happen here, and how. So you kind of have to run it through your head a couple of times, and I feel like I kind of shift the camera. What does it look like from this angle, and trying to make it as believable. And I'm certain that there are things that people would say, no, scientifically you can't do that, but I try and keep as close to what I think is physically possible and not have people do, crazy things. In the Moon Thief, Cassius has a super speed, and I struggled with that. I kept thinking, should I give him this super speed? How would I explain that scientifically? But I went with it anyway. So sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith, but it's viewing it in as many different angles. And I can imagine it's hard to narrate. And especially if they go on for very long, because you've got to be in that amped up frame of mind to read it even. You know, it would be really a terrible action sequence if the reader was reading it in a monotone, you know.
I think it's what you say. It's the turn of the head. It's like every time there's a new sight, that's a very specific point in the arc. And I think the reason that yours are so successful is that, because I've narrated a lot of action sequences for different narrators, and usually if it's not successful, it's because there's not enough detail.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to lead us through it. If we can't see it, if we're just listening, and, you know, you've got to lead it. The author must lead us through it seamlessly.
Well, I think of the scene from The Moon Thief that you just recently narrated, when they're in the BART station and they're looking for the bomb, and she's running along the platform and people are shouting at her, you know, not to get too close to the train and things like that. And you managed that so well, because there was a lot going on there. I mean, you've got a crowded BART station. They're trying to find this person, and she's in the middle of, you know, doing one thing, and Cassius is off doing another thing, and she's not even sure where he is. And then everything goes to hell. And they're not successful in that, you know, they fail in that attempt to stop this from happening. And I think there were so many things going on in that scene. I worried about that scene. I worried about how that scene would play in audio, because out of all of the scenes I've done, that one probably had a lot more moving parts than most of them do, because it wasn't a narrow focus. I mean, she's looking for two different things at the same time, and worried about where he is, and, you know, so I mean, how do you approach that? How did you look at that scene and go, oh crap, there's three different things going on here, you know?
I just read it. I mean, I trust you. So I just read it. I mean, I imagine if I'd read it, if I'd narrated it, and it's funny, I used to, when I read it in the prep, there was no problem with it as a reader. And if there's no problem with it as a reader, then there's not going to be any problem narrating it. And I can only think that, and this has never happened in the 60 books we've worked on, but what I know about you is that if I hit a spot and it wasn't working, I would bring it back to you and say, you know, I don't think this is working. And right. you would take that into consideration and take another look at it. Whether you would agree with me or not would just depend on, you know, the moment and the issue. But I know I could do that, but it never enters my mind that I'm not going to be able to narrate what you give me.
Well, I think that we hit everything.
We may have to break this into two parts.
I know. Well, thank you. And here's to our third behind the mic. Yeah. Third behind the mic. Let's go forward and keep doing them.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Coming up pretty soon. Hopefully by the end of this month.
Yay. Take care. See you soon.
All right. You too. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for Hamilton and Hazen Behind the Mic. Visit authormlhamilton.net and kelleyhazennarrates.com to join our newsletters for more insider news and views. Today's episode is sponsored by Phoenix Publication Services, PPS, Digital Shepherds. Let us ignite your writing goals.